Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Front Office Football 9 new series review slash tutorial. This is going to be the final episode of just the initial look at the game, kind of walking through the basic game mechanics over the course of a season. We are getting ready for the amateur draft coming up tomorrow, so we're going to spend a lot of time on that, dig into late free agency, and then weight training at the beginning of the exhibition season. And at that point, we'll have completed a full 12-month cycle from the beginning of the game in the 2023 season. Hopefully, this series has been useful to those of you either trying to learn the game or thinking about if you want to purchase the game. If you enjoy this, would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, leave some comments down below. We've got an existing series going on Out of the Park Baseball. We've done multiple series on OOTP and Franchise Hockey Manager in the past. We've played Tennis Manager before, and now we're digging into Front Office Football 9. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, this is a game that I've played for over 2 decades. Real excited that there's a new version out. I think I've been pretty upfront in my assessment in the previous episodes we've put out. There are definitely some quirky things with the game. The user interface is a bit dated. It's not always perfectly intuitive to me yet where to find things in this game. That said, I do believe, based on the pro football games that I've played before, that the actual game simulation engine for playing games and generating realistic results and statistics in this game is the best one out there. I think the contract negotiations and the competition with other teams for free agents when you're in the free agent period is pretty realistic and pretty good as well. So there's a lot of good aspects to the game. There's some little bugs in it that I think I've picked up, mentioned in some of the previous videos. Have full confidence that those will get cleaned up. It's certainly not a game for everyone, but it's a game that I enjoy very much, and hopefully through watching these videos, you've been able to determine whether you think you'd enjoy it or not. So as I mentioned, one of the key things that we're going to tackle in this episode is the amateur draft, which is starting tomorrow. You can reach the amateur draft in many ways. The simplest is probably the shopping cart icon as we go shopping for new players to help our team. Taking a look at the draft, we've got the 12th pick in the first round, so should be able to get a pretty good player there. In the second round, we are number 11. Third round, move up to number 10, as there were a lot of teams tied with the same record as us. And then we start getting into some multiple picks. Fourth round, we made some trades. We're going to be picking 7th, 8th, and 15th, which should allow us to add a little bit of extra talent. Fifth round, we've got our own pick, the 14th. Moving on to round 6, we pick 13th. And then in the 7th round, we once again have multiple picks, the 8th rounder from Chicago, as well as our own 12th rounder. So I have an opportunity to definitely strengthen our roster over the next several days of game time. There's also a mock draft feature that updates throughout the month from when the draft pool is announced to when the draft takes place. You can see there is a lot of variability as far as what we'll be doing according to the Solasismic Report, Pro Football Illustrated, Front Office Football Pundit, and the Gridiron Gazette. Projected to go with defensive end Ronnie Leffler, defensive end Casey Marlowe, defensive end J.C. Snelson, or perhaps safety Travian Burnham. So basically, they have no clue what we are going to do with our pick. Certainly, we're looking for the best player possible. If a big time quarterback happens to fall to us, that's something we could certainly think about. Osvaldo Hart, who by the numbers is the highest rated quarterback, is expected to go second and third in two of the drafts, but he's also projected to go in the late teens by the Gridiron Greys and 25th to the Giants in another simulation. So perhaps a little more variability in when top quarterbacks would be selected. But you can see that there's still quarterbacks near the top in three of the four drafts. Hart and Tyson going second and third in one, Osvaldo Hart going third in another, and then Mateo McDowell going third in this one. Looks like the Solasismic mock draft has the least value on these quarterbacks, with McDowell and Zeller going in the mid to late teens, and then Hart dropping all the way into the 20s, as we talked about. So I guess it's conceivable there could be an interesting quarterback prospect for us to take. Really, the only thing that there's consensus on is that Blake Dennison, an inside linebacker, is going to go number one to the Carolina Panthers. Taking a look at that profile, potentially exceptional in run defense, pass rush technique, pass rush strength. Also pretty good pass defender. He's got a ton of endurance, a great special teams player. Certainly looks like he could be a very disruptive force getting after the quarterback and just playing some pretty good defense in general. Jesse Petty, a running back who's one of the top-rated players in the draft, looks like he is close to off the charts in most of the categories that are relevant for running backs, or more accurately to say his potential is close to off the charts in many of those categories. And it looks like he's expected to go number two by three of the four projection systems. So going to be a lot of variability out here. One other thing that I have investigated a little bit, and you can see I've got just the top quarterbacks up here who I've been looking at, but we can customize this to see all draftable players, and it looks like there's about 10 players with draft grades of 7.0 or higher. Can see all of their measurable statistics, can see our scouting report on their potential skills, their personalities, and their potential injury risks, as well as what they did at the combine. And you can see that Jesse Petty is in the 99th percentile for running backs. So he is kind of off the charts interesting in terms of the physical skills that he is bringing to the board. So a lot of information to assess and think about. One other thing that I have been doing as we've been preparing for the draft is just getting a little bit of a look at what we could potentially do in the trade market. And when we go to the trade market screen, you can't shop your draft picks to the entire league, but you can shop your draft picks to individual teams. Take a look and see, just for the heck of it, what the Colts might be willing to give us for that 12th pick in the draft. And they would give us their second rounder this year, plus a first rounder and a sixth rounder next year. Just for the sake of reviewing, let's see what the Titans would give us. And you can see a little bit of a different deal there. If we were to drop down 3 spots to the 15th pick in the first round, Titans would give us a couple of future fifth rounders. Seems a little light, I think, based on the old Jimmy Johnson draft chart. Not that that is necessarily mathematically proven out, especially since it's been around for decades at this point, and I don't know that it's been refined based on how players have actually performed in the different positions that they've been picked at. But if we saw that there were several players that we liked with that number 12 pick available, it is possible that we'll try to return to this screen and perhaps extract a few extra picks for trading down a bit, which is always a potential strategy to consider. And we simmed ahead one day to the start of the draft. If this was a team that I was building for the long term, it's possible that I'd be looking to trade up and having the draft go by one pick at a time. Honestly, what I'm going to do is have the AI draft players quickly and begin the draft until we get to our selection. So we'll take a look at. I was hoping that the history would show us who's been picked so far. There must be some way to look at that. There we go. The draft list. Looks like Osvaldo Hart, the quarterback, did go before our pick, but every other quarterback is available. Blake Dennison, the inside linebacker, went. Kelly Frederick, a safety, went third. And then the highly regarded running back, Jesse Petty, went fourth overall. Looks like there also some trades being made, although yeah, I'm not sure whether the real trades in the NFL actually were saved and shown in this version of the game. But anywho, we are up to our pick. Our staff suggests safety Travian Burnham. You may remember that was a name that one of the mock drafts had us going after. Burnham certainly looks like he could be a big-time safety. Other than pass rush strength, he's potentially exceptional at almost everything. Not the world's greatest special teams player. One of the things that I do like about him is that if you look at the final row on this chart, his volatility is expected to be very low. So that means there's probably a better probability that he'll be somewhat like the player that we think he is. If volatility is at the right end of that chart and towards the high end, just means that there's a lot more variability in what this player is going to look like and ultimately develop into. Similar thing to think about is the lineup where it says fully developed. That kind of shows you how close the player is to their peak. And our scouts think that Travian Burnham is kind of half of where he's going to ultimately be. So probably a borderline starter as a rookie in game one, but by the end of the season could likely be a pretty productive defensive player. So Burnham is certainly somebody to think about. Ronnie Leffler is another guy who was projected to go to us. Can see he looks like a devastating pass rusher potentially with his pass rush technique and pass rush strength, both pretty close to the maximum, also pretty good in run defense. So a good, solid defensive end there in Ronnie Leffler. Some of the other more highly regarded players, Braden Bundy, a guard, pass block strength is a little bit of a weakness. He looks like he could end up being average in that, but we think his run blocking and his blocking strength could both be excellent. And quarterback Nelson Palafox is also a highly regarded player, pretty good in run defense actually, and then he's pretty solid in his zone pass defense. Not the greatest potential player in man-to-man or physical pass defense or intercepting passes, but importantly, he is potentially excellent at defensive diagnosis, which is a very important skill for a cornerback to have. And his volatility is incredibly low, and it looks like he's about 75% developed, so probably a relatively low-risk acquisition with Palafox, but there is certainly some volatility around areas where he's a little more susceptible to injuries. We think he's underrated. Always tend to prefer to draft someone who we think is a little underrated rather than someone who's overrated. And Palafox is also a guy who has some pretty strong measurables from his time at the Combine. And as a Jets fan in real life, I know better than fans of many teams that if you don't have a quarterback, really doesn't matter what else is going on with your team. So I always like to take a look at the quarterbacks. As we mentioned, the top-rated quarterback is off the board, but there still are several interesting ones around. Miles Zeller, his passing touch and his throw quality are not exceptional for a quarterback, and quite honestly, in the lower end for a professional quarterback, but he's pretty good at a lot of other things potentially. Somewhat interesting prospect. I don't know if I take him number 12. Like the fact that he's got high leadership. Personality being very weak, probably not ideal for a quarterback. Looks like his injury risk is relatively low, and his combine numbers overall are pretty good, 89th percentile overall, not particularly good at the broad jump. Mateo McDowell, another prospect, not a guy who runs all that much, and his decision making is not necessarily optimal. That said, he looks like his passing touch, throw quality, arm strength, throwing accuracy, and pass timing, as well as his confidence, all pretty good to exceptional. Keep in mind with all of these, just because somebody is low on good decision making, that's in the context of being a professional NFL quarterback. So he's certainly going to be on the lower end, we think, in terms of decision making relative to other starting quarterbacks. Doesn't mean that the player is necessarily going to be throwing 40 interceptions a season, though. His knee's a little banged up. We think he's very underrated, high leadership, but his personality is very weak. And combine wise, somewhat more variability here. He's definitely one of the slower guys among quarterbacks looking at those ratings. Also noticed that he is short. Irving Vermeulen, another interesting prospect among the quarterbacks. Sensing the rush and reading the defense are potentially his biggest strengths. Vermeulen's feet, not necessarily ideal. We think he's overrated overall. His combine measurables were really good, with the exception of his bench press, which was relatively unimpressive. And then the fourth guy we'll look at is Aiden Corchado. Kind of all over the board, pretty low in a few categories, pretty high potentially in a few categories. Injury risk kind of in line, good leadership, good loyalty. And when we look at his combine results, pretty good overall. His bench press and his vertical leap were kind of his weakest areas, was strongest in the 3-cone drill. I don't see that there's like anyone I'm dying to take at number 12 among those quarterbacks, or more broadly among the wide range of draftable players that we have available here. So what I did offline was kind of looked at the guys who are picking around us, from the Saints down through the Steelers, as to what they might potentially offer us to swap picks with them. And there were some interesting options. Some options were very uninteresting. But when we offered that 12th overall selection to my beloved New York Jets, they made an offer that really ultimately doesn't interest me, but the fact that you could get 3 second rounders out of it made it somewhat interesting, but not enough to trade out of the first round completely. Take a look at few of the other teams that are in that same area. Pittsburgh, if we drop back 6 picks, would give us a 3rd and a 5th, which is sadly one of the more attractive offers that we've seen. The Chargers will give us a 1st rounder, but it's next year's, along with 3rds in each of the next year's and the year after's draft. That's not particularly compelling to me. The Saints wouldn't give us up their pick this year. So, quite honestly, I don't love any of these offers, but just for the sake of trying to make things interesting and give us a little bit extra draft capital, I think I'm going to go ahead and make this trade with Pittsburgh, since there's a lot of guys that we kind of like here at number 12. I think it's possible that several of those quarterbacks will still be around at number 18 if that's the way that we decide to go. And we also pick up a third this year and a fifth next year. Again, I don't think this is necessarily fair by the traditional draft chart, but have to do what I can do. And with a lot of guys that we like on the board and a lot of needs to fill on the team, think dropping back 6 spots and picking up an extra third rounder this year, an extra fifth rounder next year makes sense. So we are going to go ahead and complete that trade. Also just kind of lets you guys see the way the trade mechanics work in this game. We'll continue to our next team pick, taking a look at the draft list, and Pittsburgh ended up taking the safety Burnham, but it looks like the cornerback Palafax and the guard Braden Bundy went. All of the quarterbacks are still there, which is interesting. Our scout recommends another safety, Colton Palmer. We'll probably go ahead and make a pick right here, so I'm going to spend a little time offline thinking about which direction to go, and then we'll let you know who we're going to pick in the first round. And I believe in trying to win by building strong offensive and defensive lines. I think if you're strong in those areas, it makes it easier for the rest of your offensive players and or the rest of your defensive players. If you can protect the quarterback and give the skill position players time and or get a lot of pressure quickly on the quarterback and make things easier for your linebackers and your defensive backs. So we are going to go with Asante Magda, a 6'6" tackle out of Oklahoma. He's someone whose run block technique is potentially exceptional. His pass block technique is potentially excellent, with good solid blocking strength and pretty respectable scheme acquisition. His endurance isn't necessarily great, but he's 50%-ish developed, and he's also extremely low volatility, so feel like we know what we're going to get with Magda. Our interview impression is that he's overrated. That said, his leadership is very high, his personality is very strong, and when you look at his combine, he's off the charts, 96th percentile for a tackle. Incredibly fast, really good jumper, not the strongest player in the world. I kind of thought I was going to go with him, but I had missed the fact that my impression is he's overrated. Not that I'll never take a guy who's overrated, but with a first round pick, it does make me a little more conservative about that. I still like Ronnie Leffler. Really think that his combination of excellent run defense, pass rush technique, and pass rush strength is pretty interesting. I do question a little bit how this skill set, the fit is a 3-4 inside linebacker. To me, it seems like a little more like a 3-4 outside linebacker, but perhaps his size at 241 pounds isn't necessarily optimal to be on the edge. He's got some injury issues too, and we also think that he's overrated despite good combine metrics. Norm Boyd is a 6'6" guard out of Oregon, another guy who's kind of off the charts in terms of his blocking skills. When we look at Norm Boyd, he does have a little bit higher risk in terms of his shoulders on his feet, and we think that he's very overrated. He's exceptional as far as his combine assessment, though. So I was really leaning towards trying to bolster the lines one way or another, but I don't love the fact that all of those guys are overrated. Jesse Blanks is a right tackle prospect. Just a little concerned that we don't think his technique is all that great. Winston Runyon is a defensive tackle, is a solid prospect, but the 18th pick in the draft feels a little high to me for a guy with his skill set who's overrated. I ultimately think, given that I'm not in love with any of the quarterbacks, that I am still going to go with Asante Magda. Will say that I generally don't go with guys that I think are a little bit overrated, but I think that when we look at where we think his ratings are and the low volatility around him, I think there's a pretty good probability that he's going to be a good, solid offensive tackle in the NFL, and there's a chance he is an excellent offensive tackle in the NFL. So we're going to go ahead and select Magda with the 18th pick in the draft, and then we'll continue on to the end of the day. Take a look at the ultimate draft list and the quarterbacks, Mateo McDowell and Miles Zeller, who were numbers 2 and 3 on the list behind Osvaldo Hart, did end up both going in the 20s to the Giants and the Raiders. So we'll have some interesting decisions in the second round of the draft. Probably not going to bore you with all of those details in the trade, since this isn't a team that we are building for the future, but we'll let you know who we end up selecting, and then we will move back into free agency. And we've simmed ahead to our pick in the second round. Our staff is suggesting the running back Walker Lloyd. Does look like he is a very explosive potential player with excellent speed, hole recognition, and elusiveness. Taking a look at Lloyd, and his injury risk is pretty moderate. Combine is pretty strong for a running back. His 40 time of 4.62, certainly not optimal, but seems like a guy who's likely going to be able to overcome that a bit with some of his other skills. We are going to actually take a flyer on a quarterback here in the second round, though. We know that Kirk Cousins is not the long-term answer. So we're going to go with Aiden Corchado, 6'4" prospect out of UCLA. Pretty good with his touch and his throw quality, his decision-making, his pass timing, and sensing the rush, all areas where we think he can be pretty good. He is a guy who has kind of moderate injury risk, very high leadership, which you like to see in a quarterback. Hard to read based on our interview with him. Don't necessarily love that his loyalty is very low. If we want to sign him back, probably going to cost us some money, but if we get to the point where we want to sign him back, it probably means that he is our long-term quarterback of the future. His combine was pretty good, 82 overall percentile-wise. Not the strongest guy in terms of his bench press, and his vertical leap was not exceptional. But at 6'4", 228, I think he's a guy who could hold up pretty good at the QB position. So we are going to go ahead and select Corchado here in the second round, continuing on to our next pick, and that will take us here into round number 3, where we're going to have the 10th pick and then also the 18th pick, with that extra pick that we picked up from Pittsburgh for moving 6 spots back in round number 1. Our staff is suggesting tight end John Boren. We'll spend a little more time scouting things out and then make a decision. And after reviewing things, I actually think that Boren was a pretty reasonable recommendation from our staff. By far the highest rated overall tight end still on the board. Speed not exceptional, and his hands potentially only average, but just about everything else we think he can be a very good to excellent tight end in terms of his skills. 6'3.5", so not necessarily ideal height, but at 259 pounds, still a pretty solid guy in the middle. Like the fact that he's a pretty good potential blocker in terms of his ability to catch the ball. We do think he's a little overrated. He does bring high leadership and relatively low injury risk to the team, and was in the 95th percentile with his combine scores. Again, his speed is a little bit weak, but pretty much good to very good in all of the other drills that he went through. Definitely feel like adding a tight end could be something that we wanted to do at some point in this draft. So we're going to go ahead and select Boren, and then we will move on to our second third round pick, the one that we picked up from the Steelers, and see if maybe we can add another interesting player onto our roster here. And with our second, third round pick, we are going to try to bolster our defensive line with J.C. Bingham, 6'3", 289 defensive tackle out of Michigan. I think he's pretty interesting looking. He's okay against the run, but potentially exceptional pass rush technique and pretty good pass rush strength. Defensive diagnosis and endurance, both very strong as well. Injury risk is moderate. I don't love that our interview impression of him is that he's overrated. Typically in previous versions of this game, particularly in the earlier rounds of the draft, I've had a tendency to try to get guys who were underrated or very underrated after we interview them. I think in the numbers behind how the game works, if you're constantly picking overrated people, you're not constantly, but you're going to, over time, end up with people that don't necessarily quite fulfill what you think their capabilities are. But for a second, third round pick, Bingham is a guy who really excelled in terms of his overall combine assessment. Think that he could definitely be someone who could help us on our defensive line this year. So with our second, third round pick, we're going to pick Bingham. The staff suggests Kari Fernandez. I'll just take a quick look at him so we can at least show you who the staff was suggesting. His pass rush strength is excellent, not as good against the run, and his technique is not as good as the guy we're going to go with. Do like the fact that he's underrated, but a little bit more injury risk associated with his knees and his feet, and his combine was not quite as impressive as Bingham's was. So we are going to stick here with J.C. Bingham with our third round pick, our second, third round pick of the draft. And we'll be finishing up the draft tomorrow. I'm not going to go into any detail on those players, but we'll kind of let you know what things look like when we're all done. And we've made it through the end of the draft, so we're going to just take a quick look at our roster, and you can see all of the rookies that we ended up picking up, along with their current and potential ratings. Looking at the entire class, we started off, as you know, with Asante Magda, who we think could be a pretty good left tackle if everything works out. In the second round, we went with the quarterback Aiden Corchado, who has upside to be a decent backup, it looks like. Obviously, our hope is he ends up developing more than this, but 44 rating is kind of a borderline starter. And then in the fifth round, Irving Vermeulen, who was another reasonably high-rated quarterback, was still around. Took a flyer on him. He doesn't look like he has a ton of potential. On the seventh round, we added a running back, Tracy Harp. Doesn't seem like he is going to be a real big-time player for us. We did like the facts that our scouts thought he was a little bit underrated, and he is a guy, if he makes the team, could potentially return some punts for us. John Boren, the tight end that we picked up, think that he's got the potential to be a starter down the line if he fully develops. John Edwards, a flanker, looks like a guy in the fourth round. Peyton Osborne, who is also with one of our fourth round picks, looks like he could be a decent center if he fully develops. Floyd Menino is a big upside guy for us. This could be the bargain of the draft, a guy that we picked in the 6th round who has gotten onto our team, and we think his current rating is better than anyone else we picked in this draft. He's got a decent amount of upside. Excellent at diagnosing plays, pretty good endurance, kind of average in terms of his rush defense, his pass rush technique, and his pass rush strength, which are going to be critical to him as a defensive end. Don't love the fact that he's really small, probably a guy who's ultimately going to possibly move to linebacker for us. The reason he lasted so long is because he's so small and so light for a defensive right end, but figured in the 6th round, with the fact that his ratings look pretty good, at least we're going to take a flyer on him. He might be a guy that we can try to bulk up a little bit in training camp, although given his height, there's only a certain level of how big we can actually make him. We already talked about J.C. Bingham, who we picked in the 3rd round, Harley Mallory, an inside linebacker that we picked in the 7th. Looks like he could be a useful guy on the roster. And then Chris Tice, if he completely develops, the 4th rounder could be in the mix to be a starting strong safety for us down the line. So added a fair number of players to kind of bolster the roster. And we are on to the late free agency period now to hopefully help bolster this team. We've got 47 players on the team right now. There are a lot of guys who were on this team last year who are still free agents at this point. So that's why, although it says there's 61 players, we're likely to lose most of those 14 guys unless we make offers to them now. After signing our drafted players, you can see we've got about $15 million of salary cap space left. So there's an opportunity for us to try to add an impact player or two over these final few weeks of free agency before head to summer vacation and then get back in training camp. And we've opened up the late free agency period. You can see we've made offers to almost 10 players here, if I can count. I think that's 9 players we've made offers to kind of bolster our roster. Certainly no guarantees that all of these guys are going to make the team. The big potential acquisition is Trey Smith, the offensive guard, 5 years, $32.5 million. And then Cameron Dicker, the kicker from the Chargers, who's a free agent, offered him 3 years at almost $3 million a year. The rest of these players are really borderline roster guys who generally aren't getting big bonuses. You can see that we've offered a couple of 1-year contracts to Casey Lopez and Gene Shelton, 1-year deals to both of these guys. No bonuses at all, so very easy to cut if they don't make the team. And then also with some of these younger players, CJ Dow is an example of a rookie who we did offer a bonus to. You have to offer a bonus to try to sign a player for more than 1 year. So we offered him a very minimal bonus. He basically has a $30,000 bonus, so $10,000 in bonus money for each of the 3 years. But if he turns out being a useful player, we'll still have him for a decent amount for this season and the next 2 after that, and we have to cut him. There's not a lot of bonus money locked up in him. So for the most part, these are just bringing guys into camp. Even if we sign all of these players, they're certainly not all going to ultimately make the 53-man roster. But with the exception of the offers that we've made to Trey Smith and Cameron Dicker, they're all guys who are relatively easy to cut, with at most a few $100,000 of bonus money, and in many cases, zero or minimal bonus money that we would end up losing out on. Oh, and I forgot to follow up on one of the cliffhangers from our previous episode, but we had proposed a new stadium, even though Minnesota didn't really need one. You can see that vote failed by an almost 2-to-1 margin. If we decided we wanted to try to make a better offer to build a stadium, what we would most likely want to do is offer to pay more of the money and use less public funds to get the deal done. You can see Carolina also ended up making a proposal for a new stadium, and their stadium vote actually passed. So the Panthers will have a new stadium in 5 years. And another thing you may have noticed in the latest news is that Cameron Bynum is holding out for a new contract for us. So when we look at our roster here, we're going to have to make a decision on how we potentially might bring him back, since at this point he is holding out on us. And I don't know why I can't see him here. That's odd. And as we know, Bynum is holding out. He's in, looks like, the final year of his rookie contract, so looking for more money. Don't know that we are going to engage with him. He's looking for some pretty significant money. Certainly an important player for us, starting safety for us last year. Didn't have any interceptions, though. Did have 10 passes defensed, and he's also pretty important player with 123 tackles for us. Had half a sack, 17 tackles for loss. So an impactful player, but we're going to try to manage that holdout through the exhibition season and the preseason, and hope that eventually he comes to his senses and comes into camp and plays out the final year of his contract. And taking a look at our roster sheet here as we get towards the final days of late free agency, not a ton of salary cap room left. Basically just going to be making minimum offers at this point, with no guarantees to a few players to round out our roster for training camp. I think it's pretty unlikely that anyone we sign in these final stages of late free agency is going to make the 53-man roster, but you never know. And as we come out of the late free agency period, we basically spent about every penny we can, only $40,000 in cap room. We do have 57 players under contract, 69 when you include the guys who were with us last year, whose contracts have technically ended, who still haven't found another spot. It's conceivable we may look to bring one or two of them back if we can, but we don't have the money to pay them any bonuses at this point, and would be playing for the minimum. Greg Joseph is the most prominent player that we'll be moving on from, but as we already talked about, we did sign Cameron Dicker in free agency, and think that with his pretty good field goal accuracy and borderline excellent ability to hit field goals from a distance, he could be a nice upgrade for us at kicker. And he's also a guy who could punt for us in a pinch if our punter has some injury issues and needs to miss a game here and there. And we've simmed ahead to the final part of the off season, and I mentioned slim rather than sim because this is weight training plan day. We're at the early stages of training camp. We can put in a recommendation for players to slim down or gain weight to perhaps make them better suited to play their position. Unfortunately, Floyd Menino, and perhaps not surprisingly, the 5'10 and a half, 212-pound defensive end we picked, is probably a guy who needs to move to a linebacker position for us, which we'll end up doing with him when we get to camp. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the opportunity to gain weight. He kind of is what he is as far as his body type. So although he was drafted as a defensive end, he's a guy that we will likely be moving to linebacker spot when all is said and done. And there's not really too much that we've decided to do in terms of putting players on special weight training programs. I found that with the game, most of the players are kind of what they are as far as their weight. Some of the guys that you'd want to gain weight just can't, and some of the guys that you'd want to lose weight just can't. That's the scenario we kind of outlined with Menino, who we'd certainly like to bulk up, but not an option for him to gain weight given his body type. We do have a center, Garrett Bradbury, who's about 15 pounds above ideal weight for a center, and a similar scenario with the guard, Trey Smith. So we're going to see if each of those guys can maybe lose a little bit of weight while retaining the bulk necessarily to play well at their position, but perhaps have a little more speed and agility. On the opposite side of the thing, Daryl Berna is a second-year inside linebacker for us who only weighs 232 pounds. Ideal weight for his role is about 245, so we're going to see if he can bulk up a little bit in training camp to hopefully make him a bit more well-suited to play the position that we have asked him to play. And you can see we had a little bit of success. Daryl Berna gained a few pounds to move a little closer to the ideal weight for his position. On the other side, Garrett Bradbury lost a little bit of weight, 296-pound center right now. So hopefully with both of those guys, it'll make them a little more effective trying to play the positions and the roles that we have asked them to play on this team. And with that, we are at the start of training camp. You'll remember we started the first game in the series at the playbook deadline. So at this point, we've kind of hit through these episodes, the key things that you're going to be doing over the course of a season if you play Front Office Football 9. Certainly didn't go into incredible depth on any of them. There's a lot more here, and if we do end up doing a Let's Play series with Front Office Football 9 in the coming weeks and months, we'll be digging in much deeper during that series into our strategy around signing free agents and drafting players and making trades and building game plans and figuring out who's going to get the playing time and all of the stuff that hopefully goes into building a team that ultimately wins the Super Bowl. So that is something that we could be tackling in future episodes. If there's questions that you have, always helpful to hear them in the comments. And hope that those of you who have watched this full episode and in some cases watched this entire series have a better idea now of whether FOF 9 is the right game for you, and if you do decide to purchase it, hopefully have a little better idea of how to approach the games and hopefully learn some things that you want to do and just as importantly some things that you don't want to do from watching what I've done right and wrong. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.